India's democratic dictatorship overtaking India. This does not bode well for Indian democracy. India may well soon cease to be the country Mahatma Gandhi struggled to free. Before our eyes, India's very character is being transformed by a government with no regard for institutions, understandings, and practices maintained since independence. Boldness, it seems, is all that matters. The increasingly salient concern is that this could be what the Indian public, modestly educated and misguided by India's skillful propaganda, really wants. Is, somehow, this exaltation of power, control and nationalism a completion of our own deepest desires? Indian supporters have less to say about the economy, which is in free fall, and relations among religious communities, which have never been tenser. India is now in the throes of a fervent nationalism that extols every Indian achievement, real or imagined, and labels even the mildest political disagreement or protest anti-national, or even seditious. Almost every independent institution has been hollowed out and turned into an instrument of the government's overweening dominance. Here is an Indian government who has upended practically every civilized convention in Indian politics. Indian government has sent law enforcement authorities to pursue flimsy charges against opposition leaders, promoted ministers whose divisive rhetoric has left Muslims and other minorities living in fear, and intimidated the media to the point that press coverage of Indian government's administration is an embarrassment to India's democratic culture. For many of Indian admirers, such flagrant authoritarian displays simply don't matter. In their view, after decades of too much soft-hearted democracy and pandering governing coalitions, a tough Indian leader was long overdue. Those of us whose faith in India's democratic system was absolute now face the sobering realization that its roots may be shallower than we had allowed ourselves to believe. In the case of the tax authorities, this is less surprising. But now agencies responsible for financial investigations, law enforcement, and the government's intelligence-gathering machinery, and even famously autonomous bodies like the Election Commission and the judiciary, are not exempt from such concerns. In India, political freedom is no longer regarded as a virtue. The new standard of social order is controlled by the authorities, and conformity by everyone else. It is difficult to remember a time when the premium on public and professional discourse marching to the state's tune was as high. Predictably, communal relations have worsened dramatically in India. The alienation of India's Muslim community is so severe that even some of the government's staunchest defenders have acknowledged it. Indian enduring popularity may mystify Indian government's critics. Most of the out-of-the-box solutions Indian government has attempted have done more harm than good. For example, Indian government's disastrous demonetization of 86% of India's currency in 2016 was probably the single biggest blow to the Indian economy since independence, costing millions of jobs and undermining growth. But that does not seem to bother most voters, for whom Indian government comes across as a decisive, no-nonsense leader who is willing to break with tradition and attempts bold solutions to India's intractable problems. This response has left many in India scratching their heads. The Indian government's supporters tout a slew of new repressive legislation, including the criminalization of talaq-e-bidat, the Muslim practice of instant divorce, as a display of resoluteness. Likewise, Indian recent abrogation of Jammu and Kashmir's special status, guaranteed under Article 370 of India's constitution, was undertaken amid a statewide lockdown. Political leaders were arrested, and telephone and internet services were suspended. There is no telling what will happen when the lid is taken off the pressure cooker. Yet most Indians are offering unstinting support. Moreover, Indian government has discarded, for the first time in the history of India's parliamentary standing committees, a bipartisan tradition that accords a member of the leading opposition party the chair of the External Affairs Committee. Today, India publishes National Register of Citizens (NRC). There are also murmurs of a new push to eliminate the personal laws that Muslim minority communities are allowed to retain to govern their family practices, and to adopt anti-conversion laws aimed at restricting missionary activity.